welcome to Select Arcane. We're back with another NaMoPaiMo video. This is going to be my 9th NaMoPaiMo, and I can't believe this whole event started almost a decade ago. If you haven't seen my previous videos, which I encourage you to do, here's a quick recap of what we're talking about. NaMoPaiMo is an international event started by the Braemere blog. It's for both beginner and established model horse artists to paint one official model for the month of February. It can be any size, breed, color, whatever, so long as it's three-dimensional. And the whole point is to challenge yourself and learn something new. There's an official Facebook group, people go all out for this with parties every year. And of course there are dozens and dozens and probably thousands by now tutorials on how to do certain things with your horse. All for free, all open source. It feels like forever ago because, well, it actually was. I used to host a ton of different parties, have friends over, and do tons of painting. It became pretty much a national holiday here. Even my place of business knows what I do every February. But alas, everyone has aged out and moved on, and I'm the only one in the area who kinda still does it. But there remain thousands of people every single year who participate, so you won't be alone if you're interested. Now that I'm officially done school, yes, I've actually finished my master's, amazing, right? It means that I have more time on my hands. Saying that, I really prefer smaller models, so I'm gonna go with these two traditional miniature foals, Hickory and Hunk, sculpted by Kylie Parks. NaMoPaiMo only calls for one official model, and any others that you paint can be extras placed into the extra album. But I wasn't exactly sure which one I wanted to be my official model, so I asked everyone on Instagram. Hunk won by a landslide, and he's going to be my official pony for this video. Expect to see Hickory next video. Both received the usual prepping routine. File, wash, prime, sand, and repeat. I'm not going to go into any detail about that because you should go watch my video if you want to learn more how to prep a resin. If you want to learn how to prep a briar instead, I have a video for that too. Back in 2021, when Kylie Parks held her stag event, I ended up getting Zeke and Hickory as my two elflings. I traded Zeke for Hunk, and as soon as I got him, I knew exactly what I wanted him to be, but I didn't feel that I had the confidence or the skills. All these years later, and after a lot of practice, I think I can do it now. Chestnut Foal Tobiano. Here are a few inspirational pictures of a Shetland in that colorway. Cute, right? It's very common, and I've seen a lot of hobbyists do this exact color on this sculpt. So, not terribly creative, but I thought it would look really cute. I prefer to use Gamblin brand oils because I just think they work better for me. The binder is linseed oil, and I'm not entirely sure why that is, but I just really like them. For the base coat, I'm going to be starting with white, Venetian red, yellow ochre, and burnt umber. Using white as the base coat, I mix everything together, and I get this soft buttery yellow. If you're thinking, wait a second, I just watched the Hickory video and this looks awfully familiar. That's right, it is. I'm using the exact same base coat on both foals. Why, you may ask? Well, if you look at a chestnut foal, they're not the same color as their adult form. They have creamy white bellies and really light legs. So what I'm doing is capturing that baby undercoat before they shed out to adulthood. And because Chestnut and Palomino are on the same chestnut spectrum, with Palomino only having one cream gene extra, it actually matches up quite well. For this first base coat, I slather that paint on and brush furiously. It doesn't really matter at this point where or how much paint is put on the foal, so long as he's covered head to toe. And, like Hickory, I'm leaving the legs blank for something to hold on to, and secondly, he's going to have white legs later on. Once he's fully coated, I come back later with a mop brush and mop up all that extra paint. This not only takes away the extra paint, but it takes away all the brush strokes, so you're left with a very clean finish. I pop them in my drying rack, and I'll have to come back to them in a few days. Three days later, I come back to layer number 2. I'm repeating the exact same base coat as I already did. This is not only going to build up the layers and cover up any spots I missed, but it's also going to enhance the coloring, and I'm paying special attention to the legs, under the tail, the belly, and the face. The rest is going to be more chestnut. The weather has been absolutely wild. If you ever worry that your weather conditions are always too poor to work on your NaMoPaiMo entry, Take it from a Canadian. If we waited for a clear day every single time we wanted to paint our entry, we would never get our NaMoPaiMo entries done. Everyone south of Ohio, listen up. These are my conditions every year at NaMoPaiMo. This is just me standing outside in a blizzard. Normal. Layer 3 brought some definition and swung from Palomino over to Chestnut. I used the exact same combination of the white, burnt umber, Venetian red, and yellow ochre, but in different amounts. I really pulled hard with more burnt umber, way more Venetian red, and way more yellow ochre. But as you can see from what I'm applying, it's not bright fire truck red or anything. That's because oils are partially transparent and allow some translucency from the base coat up into the top coat that you're putting on. This allows for a more natural, organic look. I only target those really key areas like along the back, the haunches, the shoulder, and definitely into the face and mane. Following my reference, I leave out the legs, the belly, the tail, and the chest, because that's what's going to sell the illusion that this is a young foal before they've shed out. I go back in with a smaller, fluffy brush for more control and blend out those key areas. As you can see, there's still a lot of second layer visible. And then I also go in with the base color for the muzzle and sheath area. I use black, white, and burnt umber, but mostly white. I'm going for that traditional gray muzzle look. Now you're really starting to tell this is going to be a baby chestnut, but we're not done yet. Now that he's dry, he kind of looks more like a Cheeto Puff than anything else. He's not that nice classic chestnut yet. So I add some oil to the palette I used the last layer and reactivate the paint that I used in layer 3. Yes, you can do that. I'm just using some plain linseed oil and using it in very moderate amount. I go back over those chestnut areas, but make sure to stay far away from the highlighted areas, aka layer 2. I just want to deepen that base color of the chestnut before I go into any shading or any highlighting. I take my smaller fluffy brush to make sure that those areas are nice and clean. And then I go in with that second layer of the muzzle color, black, burnt umber, and white, now leaning more heavily into the burnt umber. I hit the muzzle, the eyes, and the sheath area. Now I think we're back on track. I think you can tell by now that if you've watched Hickory's video, that hunk got left behind a little bit just because I had to build up that second layer of color. Layer 5 brought in the shading. Again, I used white, Venetian red, burnt umber, yellow ochre, virtually using the same base coat, then going darker with the Venetian red and burnt umber. Following my reference, I hit all of the shadow points like the creases, the folds of the fur, behind the ears, under the cheekbones, etc. I did this with a very small brush for maximum control. And then I went in again with a smaller fluffy brush. I blended these areas out and was very careful not to muddy anything. And already with a little bit of shading, he looks so much better than just from that base layer. Still in layer 5, I went in with the muzzle shading color. I actually used the coat shade that I just used and added a tiny bit of black, as you can see from the little puddle of paint. Using one of my nail art brushes, I dotted the shading on the muzzle in the key areas. I also hit the eyes and the sheath. And then with a very tiny fluffy brush, I mopped up the excess paint and blended it. Time for the highlights. Let's face it, this can't even be its own layer, so 5.5 it is. I take that exact same muzzle color just with a generous amount of white mixed in and carefully outline the nostrils, the lips, around the eyes, and the sheath area in those raised areas. It's not so much that there's a light source here, it's just that this is a slightly lighter color for definition. I take my small fluffy brush and just brush away that excess and mop it up. Today is February 22nd, by the way, so we are now approaching the end of NaMoPaiMo, and I'm starting to bite my nails because we're running out of time, and oils need a long time to dry. And just as I was ready to spray for doing the white markings, I totally ate my words. In 2019, we had record snowfall, and we ended up topping it. We skipped our usual winter thaw, and just kept accumulating snow, non-stop. The blizzard-like conditions didn't help, and that meant I could not go out and spray. The snow reached above our garage, it killed our tractor with effort, so it had to be taken in for repairs, and I was just really glad that our foaling mares were at the foaling farm already and didn't have to travel in this weather. But with 4 days left of NaMoPaiMo, the weather finally broke and the sun came out. I leapt at the opportunity to spray and tester dull coat to get that layer of sealant between the oils and the new acrylics that I'm going to be putting down. Because the next step are the white markings. When doing pinto markings, I always start with a watercolor pencil to map things out. I draw the outline of wherever I want my markings to be, and any mistakes I make I can just wipe with a bit of water. Making the perfect white marking can take a little bit of practice. This is how I do it. I'm using Golden brand acrylic paints in white and Titan Buff, and if you don't have Titan Buff, you can use a little bit of burnt umber instead. Using mostly white with only 1 drop of Titan Buff, so about 4 drops of white to 1 drop of buff, I mix it with water until it's the consistency of milk. By that I mean the Canadian 2% standard, or I suppose the American version of skim. I test my paints by running my brush over my tinfoil palette. If you come back with streaks, it's too thick. If you come back with it beating up on the tin, it's way too runny. Then I dab my brush on a paper towel and remove almost all of the moisture. Go back to the tin foil, run the streak again. It should be virtually nothing but smooth, and then apply to the model. You're going to notice that the layer is so thin that it's virtually transparent and you can see streaks, but this is okay. And something to note is that Golden brand is very, very glossy. Do not be concerned about this at this point. Add your layers very slowly. 1 layer at a time. It's going to take a lot of time. Put on some Netflix, Prime Video, whatever, and be very patient. Don't load your brush with paint, don't get frustrated, and just go slow. It's at this point I paused and realized the error of my ways. I was painting outside of my lines, therefore in the chestnut areas. I stopped, went and had dinner, and stewed over my mistakes. I came back and brought some rubbing alcohol. With a Q-tip, I very, very gently applied it to the acrylics and hoped that it wouldn't affect the sealant, but it did. We went all the way back down to the plastic or primer or whatever it was. And luckily this was my NaMoPaiMo model and not my extra. The reason I say this is because NaMoPaiMo is for learning and discovery. And virtually nothing goes right when you do something like this. So instead I bit the bullet and found a new reference photo for pinto markings that would cover this shoulder. I want something realistic, but I really wanted 50-50 white, so I compromised. Wetting a brush, I erased all of my pencil lines, remapped everything to the new pinto markings, except the face, that was pretty cute to begin with, and then went in again with the white markings in the new pattern, being very careful not to color outside those lines. Fast forward and we have relatively opaque pinto markings now. Remember, don't worry about that gloss. This specific paint tends to be very glossy. Continuing with the acrylics, we're moving over to the hooves, which I'm painting in a shell color. I don't have as many options with my acrylics, but I'm using burnt umber, Titan Buff, cadmium red, and primary yellow, and a little bit of white. I mix these together according to what I have as a reference for a shell hoof color, which tends to be yellowish beige, and I cut it down with water, doing the usual swatch on the tinfoil palette and pat dry with the paper towel. I apply this to the hooves in the same way I did the pinto markings, in very thin layers. I add more burnt umber to create a darker shade, and use that for the frog and bars at the bottom of the hoof. I also use that for the cornet band of the hoof. And using that original shell base color, I add the tiniest bit of red and mix up a peachy pink for the muzzle. Again, I use very thin layers. Today is February 27th and is the second last day to NaMoPaiMo. And on the 28th, I fly out to New York for a business conference, and that means I have to have this pony painted by today, so I can get the photos done tomorrow before I leave. And to be completed with NaMoPaiMo officially, you need to be done and submitted by February 28th on the time zone of your choosing. A lot of people like to use Hawaii, by the way. So with that, it's going to be a late night. Next, I move over to the eyes. If you ever look at an eyeball, they're not true white. So I use a mixture of white and black to make a very light gray, super watered down of course, and use that as the base color for the eyeballs. Before I even started this pony, I knew that I wanted to have this full with heterochromia, or 2 different colored eyes. Eyes are just kind of one of those things that takes a lot and a lot of practice, and I'm not particularly good at, but it can also make or break your entry in a workmanship class. So for the blue eye, I mix up a little bit of teal and primary cyan, cut that with white and water, and lay down a very, very light blue iris. I build the top up with a bit of darker blue using more primary cyan, go back to more light colors, use straight primary cyan for the base of the pupil, and following my reference, I use true black for the pupil itself. Blue eyes especially have a lot of variation, so I try to be very careful with this. On the other side, I mix up straight burnt umber, use that as the base of the iris, use pure gold acrylics as the highlights, mix some burnt umber with black for the base of the iris, and then black as the iris itself. During the entire time of the eye process, I also made sure that the horse was going to be looking in the proper direction and not be cockeyed. I also do an outline on the eyelids themselves for a little bit of eyeliner, but also to gain some definition. These eyes are so tiny that they can get lost and muddied with what I have so far, so I outline them. And that's that for the acrylics part. Oh wait, you thought we were done? No, not yet. Next I break out my Derwent watercolor pencils. On top of a fresh layer of dull coat, they really pop out. Following a reference for shell hooves, I make tiny little lines on the hooves themselves, using umbers, whites, caramels, and browns. I scratch in the shading for the sole of the foot, and make sure to blend it in with the white pencil on top. I also add roning, tiny white hairs around all the white markings. This is going to blend that pinto pattern together, and I add extra roning to the face for a bit of realism. And if it looks a bit dark, the dull coat's going to cut it down. I add a few more details to the eyes, especially the blue one, and don't forget the chestnuts. I'm feeling really, really happy with this pony, but there's one more thing we have to do. After one more coat of sealant to lock in those pencils, I gloss the eyeballs and nostrils with Liquitex gloss varnish. This adds a lifelike shine and protects them. And with that, he's done. Cheers to year number 9 of NaMoPaiMo. I'm so happy with how he turned out that I think he's the best NaMoPaiMo horse I've ever made. If you've been following me on Instagram, you know that there's another NaMoPaiMo video coming. My extra horse. This little colt needs a name, so I'm going to be deflecting this to my Instagram poll. Now that he's handed in, I can rest easy and go to New York in peace. Thank you so much for watching. If you're looking forward to seeing my next NaMoPaiMo video, please like and subscribe. You can follow me on Instagram @SelectArcane or on Facebook by the same name. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!